I would like to start us off by sharing with you that about a year ago, I was sitting in this same room in one of those seats in a conversation about the presence of intergenerational trauma and its importance for systems change. And why I want to bring this in is because today we're being invited into a conversation that cuts across time and across geographies, and that I feel is being led by collective healing intelligence that is wanting to manifest through all of us, through those of us speaking here, but also through you who are listening and who will be offering us questions. We're all of us bringing that in together. So let's take a moment to feel that, to welcome that together into our space. Because we are not alone in this really challenging time where there's, Earth is burning both with climate crises and the difficult challenges we're having with wars and other forms of strong conflict between the human family. And when we bring things like that in, our nervous system might start to get shaky. So we'll be infusing this session with moments to breathe deeper and to connect back to this collective healing intelligence so that we know that we're not alone as we face this. There's a much larger, stronger, higher order intelligence that's wanting to support us in dealing with this. And in order for us to have a conversation about that, we have a stellar panel today that I will introduce to you in a moment. But just before that, I also want to let you know that part of what we want to do is to make this also an experiential, not just a cognitive experience for all of us. And so we're going to, Louise very graciously has accepted to also offer an invocation at the beginning. So I will introduce the panel. Then Louise will offer the invocation, and then, we'll take just a few seconds of silence to let that land. And then inside of that context, then we'll have the conversation. Okay? So my notes are here on my phone. So, excuse me. Let me put on my glasses. And let me first introduce to you my dear Annika, Sten, Pärson, of the Inner Foundation. Annika is based in Stockholm and has over 25 years of experience in management roles across the media, retail, and consumer good industries. She co-founded the Inner Foundation in 2021, which is committed to investing in solutions that strengthen inner health and address the pressing challenges of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, uniting for-profit and non-profit solutions across 3 continents, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, and North America. Welcome, Annika. And next to Annika, we have Edwin Macharia. And Edwin is based in Nairobi and is co-founder and managing partner at Axum. And he leads work with heads of state, CEOs, philanthropists, and investors, supporting them in strategy, program design, and capital deployment. He currently sits on a range of global boards that reflect his commitment to transforming lives in Africa and beyond, such as the Nature Conservancy, Mozilla Foundation, Prudential Kania, and the Wellbeing Project, among others. Welcome, Edwin. And next to me sits John Kania, founder of the Collective Change Lab. John is based in Boston, and he's also the executive director of the Collective Change Lab, a nonprofit focused on advancing transformational systems change. Previously, John was global managing director at FSG, a nonprofit consulting firm and think tank that John co-led for 17 years. He is co-author of numerous Stanford Social Innovation Review articles, including Collective Impact, The Dawn of Systems Leadership, The Relational Work of Systems Change, and recently Healing Systems. Welcome, John. And finally, my dear Louise Marra, who is from the Ngai Tuhoe Maori tribe in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and is also Pakeha of Celtic origins. She's a systems healer, author and founder of the social enterprise Reroute, of Unity House, and of the Pakeha Project. She currently leads restorative leadership, decolonization programs, and healing processes for organizations and systems. She is an associate of the Center for Social Impact and a senior associate with the Collective Change Lab. And with that, my dear Louise, over to you for our invocation.
I'm going to stand, just because it's easier to do this chant I'm going to do. And I just want to say a little bit about it. So as Laura said, I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and part of the Tūhoe tribe. And meeting people is sacred. Hey, it's a sacred thing. So we always kind of start in a sacred way. And the small chant, all you have to do is receive it. I'll do it 3 times. Is from someone in my lineage, Rose Pere, who was one of the 13 grandmothers. I don't know if people know the 13 grandmothers, but they were kind of set up around the globe to kind of hold, you know, certain energies and a place on the light grid. So she passed last year, but this is her chant. And it invokes the heart and the collective heart. Hey, and for the good of humanity. So it's very short. All you need to do is just receive it. You can close your eyes, open them, whatever feels good to you. And yeah, I'm going to do my best with it. Ko te manawa nui, ko te manawa roa, ko te manawa aroha. Ko te manawa nui, ko te manawa roa, ko te manawa aroha. Ko te manawa nui, ko te manawa roa, ko te manawa aroha. Thank you.
Yeah, and I invite you to take a moment to feel your body, to feel your heart, to feel your feet and your connection to earth, and to feel included whether you're sitting in this room or somewhere else, whether you're being with us right now as this is being recorded or sometime in the future. Feel yourself welcome. And feel the difference it makes when we start this way. And let's all take a joint deeper breath together. Thank you. And with that, I would like to start us out by offering a question that addresses the title of what we're doing here today, inner work. Inner work might mean different things to different people. So I would like to start by situating us and bring in the experiences that you all have around this. So John, starting with you, could you share with us what does inner work and healing mean to you?
Okay, thanks for handing me the first question. First of all, it's an honor to be here and wonderful to be with these panelists. We had such fun at breakfast this morning. That was great. And to be here with all of you and the people on live streaming. This is my 4th Skoll, so I'm sure I'm a newbie relative to some of you. But I'm always amazed at the energy, and it feels like, you know, I got here a day or two ago, and gosh, we got it all in front of us too. So just delighted to be with you. Yeah, inner work for me, I guess, you know, is about getting to know myself better, trying to get a better sense of my fit in the world, and also increasing my consciousness of my interconnection and my interbeing. You know, I think inner work as a phrase can be misleading because it can feel like it's all about like me, right? But I think if you look, you know, all of the major wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions, really think about inner work as helping helping us to create reciprocity with ourselves and with others, with the earth, and with God or spirit or whatever you want to call it. And just as an example of that, so I'm a bit of a seeker. You know, if I go to like, what do I do for inner work? Well, I meditate, I do therapy, I go on spiritual retreats, I read obscure religious texts. You know, I've done that forever, but I've never kind of considered like being in nature inner work. It was more well-being. You know, it's great to get out there, but is that really inner work? And I think just over time, you know, I've noticed that, like, when you're in nature and if you slow down and just notice nature, like maybe just a little stream of water off of a rock and just notice it, nature will start noticing herself back at you. You know, and just as an example of this, I don't know, you know, if I've ever told you this, but Louise wrote this wonderful book called Rerooting, and before I knew Louise, I read this book, and it's about developing, I hope I don't get it wrong, you can fill it in, but it's about developing a relationship with a tree. And it's a set of practices for developing a relationship with a tree. And it you know, you have to slow down because these practices, you know, it takes weeks upon weeks of just learning to approach the tree, you know, to not even being in contact with the tree for a while, to just really, really noticing. And you know, after a while, I could feel the tree noticing me. And so that's reciprocity. And so healing is, for me, it's about returning to my whole self and, you know, sort of reintegrating something that was fragmented off from me. And I'll just give a very quick example for myself. So when I was 4 years old, I was in my home, and unfortunately a terrible accident happened, and another child died. And I internalized it as my fault for most of my life. I probably still do. But that fragmented me off from any sense of God or spirit for literally 30 years until my mid-30s, when I started, I got to meditate. And when I started meditating, this trauma came back to me. And it allowed me to actually start healing from it. And that's been a long process, and I don't think it's over. But I do feel more whole. I feel like, my gosh, I actually am lovable, which for 30 years I didn't think, which allows me to have more compassion and love for other people. So, yeah, it's returning to that whole. So, yeah. So, very good.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
And who would like to continue? Or shall...
Is there already
Okay,
duck in
thank
the
you.
question?
Exactly.
Yeah, do.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's my very first Skoll, so I'm a newbie in that sense. And in a way, I guess I'm also quite of a newbie when we talk about inner work. I'm not the person that has spent hours of journaling every day or going to these retreats, or I didn't even kind of had a word for it not so long ago. But then life happened, and Inner Foundation kind of came to me, almost more than I came to it, sort of. And I started Inner Foundation early 2022. And it's almost like I did not have a choice because resources were coming our way. My life traveled at that point, realizing, and for also some work I did at a non-profit organization in New York for several years, realized that this is not, something needs to be done. I have my resources, my experience, and I need to give back and start addressing the mental health crisis. And it is a pandemic of crisis. So while doing that, it was, of course, the inner work was kind of a necessity. And it's not, and I think that maybe before that it was very much about me personal. Now it's not, it's sort of the collective inner work, I think, and how important that is. So in preparation for this panel, I kind of took a deeper look into what that looked for me, that is for me, and I it's very much about how I'm trying to show up in the world, and I constantly failing of being present, and I'm working on it almost every day. So it's an early journey, and I'm thinking about it as almost without that inner work with me as a person, or with my team, or in the work we do as we support mental health organizations, as we heard, like for-profit and non-profit. So of course the conversation is about mental health and inner work. And we could not do that if we don't try to work with our own. So it's almost like a compass, like something that helps me to guide, but also navigate the complexity, because it is so hard. It's not like, what do you do to fix the mental health crisis, right? It's so many things. So how can we stay in that complexity and without being crazy and kind of just leaving because it's too hard? So inner work is kind of needed for that. And also the commitment, sort of to be in that uncomfortable space, because it's certainly not, I'm not the one who, I'm privileged. I have the resources to actually support others. But as a collective, we need to be in that uncomfortable space. I think that is so important. It's so hard. And it's also kind of a long-term commitment. How do we keep being there even though, sort of the patient of it? And for me, that requires inner work. I'm kind of let's go to action, let's fix it. But this does not work in this space. We need to be, it's urgent, therefore it needs to take time. And we need to think, and we need to work with our inner us, collectively and individually, to do so. And then the whole healing thing. Healing is almost, it's a lot to capture for me what that means. Because we all come to this world with a lot of trauma, one way or another. So for me, I think healing it's not to fix stuff, but it's like starting from a place of hope. And that hope actually, it's a muscle, something you need to practice. You go to your hope gym, sort of, and sort of work on it. And you constantly do that. And it's certainly not just personal, it's very collective, I guess. I think I end there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika.
Happy to build, because I think in some ways, similar to you, it's not a space I professionally lived in and have grown in, right? But I take the word work in inner work, right? Like it's an active word, it's not a passive word, right? It's not as though you read a book or you have something and then you are healed or it's done, right? It's constant, continuous work that you have to do. And I think that critical piece of being in the journey is actually probably the most important part of it all, right? Is recognize there's work to be done and you have to do it. And I'll be the first one to say I fail miserably at always doing the work, right? Like how many people use their cell phones as their alarm to wake up today? Like how many people in the room? Almost everybody, right? And the minute you turn off the alarm, what's the other thing you do? Like you check your messages, right? Before, when it was, as my daughter would say, in the old days when you had the snooze button, right? Like you would wake up, you'd have time to like think, gather yourself, go shower, and then come and see what's happening in your world. Right now, it's almost the second thing that happens, right? And that changes your energy and the way you think about the day, right? How many people commute to work at least 3 times a day? So 3 times a week, sorry. How many people? Much smaller number, right? For me, commuting to the office used to be a great time to just kind of center myself, right? And if it was public transport or driving, there's just something about just being in the car, moving. I'm not having to deal with the other thing. Now usually you wake up just in time for that first Zoom call, right? And you pajama bottoms and shirt on top. Like we've all done it, right? But what does that mean for? Not you. Exactly. There's some exceptions. There's some exceptions to the rule, right? But what does that do to you in terms of just being ready for the day that's ahead, right? Like you're actually not necessarily ready for the day ahead. And so there are things that the sound of inner work sounds kind of, I must go to the forest and meditate, right? But there's just some basic things about the practices of an everyday life that changes the way you are and the way you show up to others, right? For me, the big turning moment was actually COVID. I was the global CEO of a firm that had about 600 people spread across the world. And very quickly realized there were only 24 hours a day. Literally, we had teams in Melbourne and Seattle. So for 3 weeks, I think I had like 2 hours of sleep because you're trying to talk to every single person in every single time zone. And realize, first of all, impossible to do that. And then secondly, I'm not actually being effective in being there and present for my teams in the ways I could. And so you have to devolve, I guess in that kind of systems world, you have to devolve the capabilities to where people are and able to meet them at their needs at the time when they need whatever it is, not at the time that my calendar works, right? Which is inevitably what tends to happen. And in that shift, it then becomes the work piece, right? So it's not a thing that is done to you, it's a thing that you have to do. And as leaders who are thinking about impact beyond ourselves and our entities and organizations, then you have to ask, how is it that you are triggering others to do the work that they need to do, and then get to that space of kind of passing it on to others. And we had this great conversation of our breakfast today on how do you actually scale these things, right? Are they actually scalable? Or is the mechanistic sense of scaling actually the wrong one because it puts things in boxes and says everybody has to have exactly the same experience as the other person, and there's no space for difference and context and culture, right? So I don't think we've cracked the two global impact piece, right? I think the inner work, many of us are increasingly understanding that that's important, and it's not something that's passive, and it's something that we have to do. But the move into global impact, I think, is where our ecosystem doesn't quite have the answer yet, and would be great to explore, not just for ourselves, but even the people in the room, if there are folks who've seen ways that's been cracked and that's working.
Thanks so much, Edwin. Louise?
Yeah, beautiful to hear everyone. So, I'll just share some of my experience. And I really feel that the inner work or the inner transformation saved my life. And I just feel so grateful to be able to now orientate inside and away from all the kind of trauma architecture that ended up in my being. I'm both colonised and coloniser, and I've spent a lot, of really being with these energies in myself to kind of bring them together. And I know this might sound strange, but in some ways they longed for each other. They longed for some union in me. And so it's almost like as I do more of the work, I get to kind of be with all parts of myself and bring love to those parts and allow kind of the alchemy that I want on the outside, on the inside. And so for me, the inner work is, and sometimes I don't like using the word work. I really see it as a privilege and a weaving and a rewiring. I get to be a walking restorer. I get to be a walking restorer by restoring so much that's wired through me. And for me, it's enabled me to liberate myself, I guess, from my trauma structures and trauma heritage, and really unfold my medicine in the world, like really unfold myself and be able to meet and connect with you. And it's been amazing being here at Skoll, like how much life energy there is. Modi, we would say life force, heart force. And I can just be with you and be with me, and I don't have to lose myself in you or lose me or lose you. So for me, it's such a sacred, beautiful thing that I find the universe within me. And we'll say more as we go on, but this becoming a walking restorer, I don't think we can really do that without inner work or without inner, without really understanding kind of all the magic inside us and all the trauma inside us and where I'm coming from. So to me it's just a super empowering journey that I love and hold very sacred.
Thank you, Louise. That was very touching. And what I'd like to do now is to make some space for the specific medicines for the world that each of you bring. And Louise, I would like to start with you. I have heard you speak about systeming, that is using system as a verb. And I would like to ask, can you share with us a bit more of what you mean by that and how this connects to this worldview that allows you to be a walking restorer?
Yeah. Yeah, I really love verbalizing everything. Otherwise, we concretize it. Like, to me, everything's a movement in life, everything, including the system. So I love talking about systeming, and also that we're all systeming. Like, we're all active in the way we create the system. So for me, again, it's a really empowering thing, and it's so connected to the inner work, is where am I systeming from? So which part of me, because we all know that we have this place, however you describe it, like, I think of it as my essential self. I also think of it as an interbeing self, an intrabeing self. It's not a, it's this location of me. And then am I kind of systeming from that place, or am I systeming from my trauma and trauma architecture? There's a lot of trauma architecture that's been in me. And those seed something different into the work. If you like, they have different frequencies, different vibrations, and I can seed something, I can do my activity from these different places. And so much of my work is helping people to know the difference and where they're seeding from. And I think this is super important as we go into systems change, about what energy are we kind of putting into our work, what energy. So do I kind of give you my project with a whole lot of my trauma and stress? Do you know what I mean? And go, here's a whole package. Yeah. Or am I doing it from my love and connection? So to me, if we all, because I don't like seeing the system as a concrete thing, that makes it seem immovable. But we're all systeming, and what I love is if we did that together, and so much of my work is bringing, human fields together. I call it the art of human fielding, that actually can system together in this way, which I think becomes a really different movement, a really different kind of transmission into the world. So you're all systemers. Hey, you're all systemers, and also, just one more thing, but what I find so empowering is I can actually, in some ways, work with my hatred and rage about things on the inside, so that I don't leave it on the outside to join all the other disowned hatred and rage and become the force that fuels the system. Yeah. So if I can transmute that here, and be the embodiment, be the place that can be owned, then I can system from a whole different place. So I think it's such a live conversation for us all to have, and I'm super glad to be here to be having that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Louise. And let's take a moment to let that land in us. And I would like to turn to you now, John. I've heard you speak about systems being stuck. You've written about it, and that a lens of looking at trauma and looking at healing can help them get unstuck. Can you share with us more about that?
Sure. So it was reported before the pandemic that 70% of the people in the world had experienced some level of trauma. You can imagine what it's at now. And of course, it's different. There are lots of different types of trauma and experiences with trauma, and so I'm not trying to equate them. But I think what I am trying to say is that trauma at this is really a part of the human experience. And so people are traumatized, and people make up systems. So if people are traumatized, systems are traumatized. And what happens with somebody when they're traumatized? An overwhelming event, there's a part of them that fragments off, really for intelligence and safety reasons, but stays out here and isn't integrated in. And if you don't integrate that back in, the experiences that many of us have had and seen of fight, flight, or freeze. So that's what happens at an individual level. They're stuck. It's happening at an individual level, and it's happening at a systems level. Our systems are stuck. So what does that look like at a systems level? Well, it's a fractal. Some of you may have heard that term, but it's basically the same conditions that are created at an individual level are created at a systems level, right? So you have systems that are by and large disembodied and disconnected from lived wisdom. You have systems that are in a state of survival and fear rather than trust and connection. You have systems that are focused on fixing things because we got to do things urgently versus stepping back and tapping into the energy flow of life. So that's where we are right now. We have traumatized systems. We have systems that are stuck, and we are overlaying our work on top of traumatized systems, and then we wonder why we don't get the results. And until we deal with the trauma in the system, we're just going to get this over and over and over and over again. So we have to address the trauma. In the United States, we have to address our traumas, our twin traumas we've got a lot of traumas, but of genocide with one peoples and slavery. And until we actually address that trauma, we're going to go over and over and over again. But the good news is that if we move towards healing, just as an individual, when they heal, you start to see life in a different way. You develop more agency, more freedom to see what might actually be possible. That can happen for us at a systems level. But we have to move out of this stage of stuckedness. And it's a different way of doing the work. And we can talk more about that. But this sense of urgency and just putting more out there, faster, 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 it's just not going to work for us when we're stuck, when we're traumatized.
Thanks so much, John. Yeah. So again, let's take a moment and let that in. Yeah. Thank you. And Edwin, you have worked with a lot of systems and you have worked with a lot of people. And I would like to ask you about both examples you might have seen of things that have actually worked in terms of even though there might have been trauma in the space, somebody was able to make it through. And then there's a lot of other instances where people have, a lot of resources, talent, hard to do this, but it doesn't gel. What are the things that are most important that are missing that if they were there could actually make a difference?
Yeah, that's a $10 billion question, or 10 billion people question,
Yes.
right? Because we're all seeking that, right? I mean, I hear Louisa and John speak. I'm like, I want to be like them, right? I want to feel grounded and have both the language and the experience and the ability to see it and do something about, right? As mentioned, I'm new to this space in a sense, right? But the things they say deeply resonate because I spent 20 plus years trying to get development to work, trying to get incomes to work, trying to get people dignity in jobs, and you think of these in the systems of agriculture value chains and healthcare systems, right? And you look back and you realize it's all incremental. It's not transformative. So there's something else that's holding things back, right? And part of it is the systems we have been built on these inequalities, these traumas, these almost accepted reality that there are some people who need to be poor And there's some people who can't have enough to eat because the world has decided that's a system it has. It's not that we don't produce enough food for everybody to have enough to eat, right? And so how do you fix those systems, right, is a critical question. And I don't have the perfect answer, but at least I have seen leaders who move from a basic sense of awareness, right? So, most of us do our work in this is a thing in front of me, I have, presidents are like, how many jobs did I create? What's the GDP growth? What's the infrastructure investment? Blah, 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 right? CEOs are like, what's my profitability, right? Like it's those kinds of hardcore measures. And many people in the room, that's what we do, right? Like it's those, what are the single or 2-3 numbers that we care about and how do we deliver those without actually recognizing the systems upon which they sit and the ways in which we are operating, at best operating within, at worst perpetuating, if not making worse, the same systems. So there's a call for just a general awareness of this is where we are and these are the systems we're in and this is our role in those systems, right? And then I've seen those who move from an awareness of, that's interesting, to actually begin understanding and begin questioning and then begin transforming and then hopefully finally begin passing that on to others, right? So there's a bit of that journey that's there. The challenge, I think, tends to be most people will be uncomfortable being in this room having this conversation, right? Most people would think of this is just a woo-woo thing, right? Like just a thing that those people do, but it's not for me, right? Because I'm the CEO of a thing, right? We've been having lots of conversations recently with a whole bunch of funders, as you all know, with what's happened with aid in the world, USAID, as well as the Europeans and everybody else pulling back their aid, and asking philanthropy, especially in this first wave, is how are you funding? And most of them are still in the world of it needs to be a 100-page proposal with 50,000 metrics that nobody will ever look at, but I just need to feel comfortable that they're on the piece of paper. It needs to have, a weekly audit, right? So, and those are things that have come from trauma in many ways, right? Because there's no trust in who your who's the person on the other side. But in their desire to move quickly, we're then slowing down because there isn't enough trust that I know you and I know you do great work. I trust you will use the resources in the most appropriate way for the thing that needs to be done. And so there's a big part of the system that has been built on antagonistic relationships and low trust, and therefore everything must be documented and must be verified before I send you the next tranche of resources. And that just creates more and more gap between us. And we must find ways of those with resources and those who are doing work to actually say, look me in the eye. I kind of know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. The reason you know me is because I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. Trust me to be able to do the right thing and be able to provide the support that's needed. So those who are able to make that transition from awareness, understanding, and then almost mastery, and then begin to change it, I think is critical. The other thing I'll say is, I think of this space as, and we talked about this at breakfast, not as we will all live in a world, exactly what John said, in a world where there is no challenge, there's no trouble, there's no issue, there's no trauma. The entire purpose is to be sufficiently resilient so that when that moment comes, you can actually stand through and power through whatever the challenge is. And so sometimes this gets talked about as, we need to go sit under the tree and only sit under the tree and we will be happy forever. That is not reality, right? Do we have the resilience to be able to power through the challenges that are coming? And there are many and will continue. But are we becoming anti-fragile, right? Are we getting strong? Is that muscle getting stronger? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Edwin. And Annika, I would like to ask you about, as a funder, why has this been important to you, and how do you see that philanthropy might have a role in making, including healing work and inner work sustainable for the work of systems change?
Yes. Why? I think to start with, which is sort of the heart of the inner foundation was built in order to build inner foundation in order to have an outer world worth living in, sort of, right? So I think also because the idea that came for us is to sort of have this sort of, that we support not philanthropy work, but also early startups, and which I think it's kind of the system needs different types of change makers. And for me and for us, that's very important. But the particular question on why philanthropy, I think it's so many, and I think that conversation needs to go on, and it needs to be sharper, and it needs to be sort of more sort of demanding from both spaces. But yes, that's as you were saying, and it really resonates to me with it, that why are funders having all those 100 pages of applications, and it actually, and I haven't really thought about it exactly the way you phrased it, it's based on some kind of lack of trust. Not being mean, because I think that's something different. It's actually because the inner work has not been done, and actually partly from both sides, I think, if I may say so. Because there's something about aligning on why are we doing this, aligning on the mission, and spending that time early in the process, because then things get so much easier. And I think therefore for us, and I mean we are, a smaller funder of the world, but very specific in this mental health space, but how we work with it, but also how we try to really create that space of trust, really trying intentionally to do that. But that also means that I think and that could be different for different types of funder, but also thinking that we might be able to actually support with things which is more than the actual cash, sort of, because that's the type of funder that we are. And creating that sort of relationship with the individual organization that we support, but also with the ecosystem. Because I think we are seeding into ecosystem of change. And I love the way you all phrase it, like it's a dynamic thing. I don't know if I'm kind of losing it here, but probably because it is so complex, and that's why I have to sort of do my inner work, right? But I think there's also something, and I know when we've been speaking a couple of times, I come back to that inner work can sometimes also be so exclusive that if you're not into that circle of amazing inner workers, you are like the simple outer worker kind of person. And I think it's important, and I take that as a mission myself, to sort of think about the language we use. So it actually includes others to come along. And I come from the business world, and I have my language, right? We have a lot of conversation about scaling, John and I, because what is scaling? And how important it is to sort of include the language, talk about accessibility, doing inner work, and changing whole system. It's about the collective of many. So therefore, we have to be super open, super sort of pay attention to how we work and how we sort of include others. Because it's actually from both sides, as again I say, used to be an outer, now slowly moving into the inner, right? So language is important. I also, this work, it's not something you do when you have something, a little time over or just for me. It's sort of, how do we make inner work part of the operating system of how we operate? And like so many things when change needs to happen, it's like the continuity of that. Meaning create an inner work as we do, hundreds of looking at many organizations every year. Probably looked at 400 or 500 mental health organizations for the last couple of years. So how do we do that in a way that in the due diligence process, we always ask about why are you doing it? Why is it important? Without, as I think you're saying it so well, without putting my trauma on somebody else. And also the other way around, right? Having that kind of respect for one another. I mean, I guess I maybe lost it, but I think the global impact starts with small steps, and then slowly becomes something. Yeah. And I think we all have to do our work and include others to be part of that work. And there is no other way, actually, I think, because It's so urgent now that we try to align on missions, and that will not be done if we haven't done the work ourselves as individuals or as collective, I guess.
If I could add,
Please.
And this is one of those, part of what makes this a fantastic conversation, all of these are half-formed thoughts. Like we all say this at breakfast, like we have half-formed thoughts, but nothing, like I don't have the checklist for everybody to take away, right? In part because actually it's so complex and difficult, and nobody's cracked it, right? And so this is a collective journey we are on. But there's a phrase that we use at Axum, which I love and maybe actually begins to apply to here, which is you evolve the world at the speed of trust, right? Because we see ourselves as a firm, like a big part of our job is to get people to do things a bit differently. If it can be massively different, fantastic, but just slightly different. But to convince somebody to do something slightly different is they need to know you and trust you to come with you on that journey of doing something different. And I think not enough intermediaries think of themselves as our job is just to get people to do something a bit different, experience, and then that gets them on the journey, right? So the experience we had today in the invocation and then kind of sitting in that moment changes the way that you experience even this conversation. But if I think of the many discussions I have with heads of state or CEOs, we never have that moment, right? There's space to actually get them to be in a different emotional, spiritual, mental state, for them to even experience it a little bit and then say, oh, wait a minute, this is different. Like, maybe I should start running my cabinet meetings differently, right? Or my EXCO meetings differently. Is we need to find those hooks for getting them to start that first time. And then hopefully it begins to change the way they operate and therefore the systems they operate in and so on and so forth.
And isn't that amazing when you start doing that?
Yeah.
How things, what kind of different conversation you have.
Exactly.
It's like amazing, right?
Exactly.
You start with something, then suddenly you're sitting with somebody that you just met, even over Zoom,
Yeah.
and you're coming into the deep work and you're thinking like, yes, we can actually work together.
Yeah.
And it's kind of quick,
Yeah.
because you actually are really having, you're safe enough, so you're thinking, okay, I'm putting it out there, I'm vulnerable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think it's, what a power, right?
Indeed, and that's also, the power of healing. And I'd like to bring the conversation back to a couple of things you were saying. You mentioned how important trust is. And to me, that's so deeply connected to when there's no trust, often what's there is the lens of trauma that tells you that you're in danger, even when you no longer are.
Yeah.
But it just stays with you. And so then you're looking around, but it says danger, danger, danger. And the other person might have nothing to do with that. But it's like, oh, what does she want from me? Yeah, she smiled at me. What does she want from me? Get that kind of, and it's in your body and it just comes up. And so to shift out of that, you need a change in awareness. So this journey, that's also part of why there's an inner dimension to it, because we need to develop another kind of awareness that can tell, oh, that was trauma in me. And then bring compassion and not shaming yourself. Oh my God, I've done so much work and it's still here. And, not like that. That's not helpful. But to say, yeah, that's trauma in me. So, and then I bring, one thing I love to do is to bring my hand to my heart and to say, yeah, and then bring compassion to myself and then look around and then receive the smile that I was given as a smile, And today I can do that because of, all the people that supported me to do that. But so I do see how important it is that we kind of shift our lens on trauma to see that that's a point of entry for us to really transform our awareness. So before we shift over to Q&A, I'd like to ask each of you for a moment. There's this quote, and John, I'm not going to forget it, but maybe you will, about how it is the inner conditions of an intervener that determines the outcome of an intervention.
Right. It's the success of the intervention is based on the interior condition of the intervener.
Thank you. And that was from Bill
O'Brien.
Thank you. I love to be doing teamwork, collective intelligence. And so, so if there were, a question or a practice that you would like people to take with them from having heard us here that could support them in having coming from a place within themselves that can generate a better outcome because we're flowing from a different place? What could help people get access to a different place within so that what comes out outside might be a different thing? Quote, question, practice. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like what you guys were talking about because I work a lot with the nervous system and our body system. Actually, we need small incremental, well, not incremental, we need kind of small changes in our nervous system that kind of go ping, 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 ping. And it changes a lot. If I try and do something too big, then I actually often re-traumatize myself. So, and that's the same in the collective. And I think what we're seeing is that, what happens in my body system is what happens in everyone's body system to a degree, and in the collective. We have a collective nervous system. So I think this in a state, and of course it's not a perfect state, but it is kind of, so my things would be, this almost invocation for yourself to restore love to all parts of your system first. And slowly, different parts will show up in order to be loved back into the whole. That would be one. My second thing would be go and make friends with the tree. Because it's amazing. Trees are built to, well, not built, but they have similar nervous systems. But if we can take ourselves out of being a separate floaty object, out of that paradigm, into this, we are Earth, we actually get access to the flow of life, and it really helps bring us down. Like we talk about grounding as if we know how to do it, but actually grounding means I'm connected to the earth. And we use these terms. So I would really suggest that you give that a go because it develops this much more expansive sense of self that to me is such a radical act. If we could all do something like that, we would seed all our actions from such connective tissue rather than from separation or disconnect, which breeds more disconnect. So those would be my suggestions. Anyway, I have plenty more, believe it or not.
Thank you.
Mine's the simple one is go back and buy an old school alarm clock. Right? If you can, buy shares of alarm clock companies and then buy the alarm clock. But just go back and buy an old school alarm clock and give yourself that 30 minutes of, I didn't look at my phone and what's changed the world and I'm just already in that space is just, and then get in.
Thank you.
God. I think it's something about a line around missions and do the inner work. I think. Yes.
Thanks, Annika.
I would say, one thing that's been super helpful for me has been getting a better understanding of my own trauma triggers. And part of what that's helped is me to understand and empathize when trauma is coming at me. Like if somebody has an outsized reaction to a normal question or statement, it could often be because they're in trauma. If I say to you, could you please move the chair to the right? You go, no, I can't. That's outside. Like, where did that come from, right? Well, it probably came from that person's trauma. And the awareness that that person is going through something, that it's not me, first of all. We always say, well, it's not my problem, it's their problem. But that they are going through something. It's a whole different way. And, I don't know if folks have read Resmaa Menakem. He wrote this wonderful book called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's about racialized trauma. And at one point he says, a settled body settles bodies. A settled body settles bodies. And I think, we have this collective nervous system. And part of what we can do is help that nervous system, you say it all the time, calm itself down. And then we can actually do the work. But if you're heightened up here, if my asking you to move that chair triggered you, we've got to slow down. We can't get done what I thought we were going to get done. We've just got to slow down and sort of address the situation, address what's going on. And so, but I couldn't have gotten there until I realized, holy shit, when I like go like this, well, there's something going on, And so, anyways.
Thank you so much, John. And I would like to add also on my end, first of all, to know that, this is a very complex journey, and where we start might be a place where, like, if you were going to tell me that I was going to be sitting here, talking to these people and talking to you and not be blanking out, because that's what used to happen to me when I started, I would have laughed because I could not have imagined that that was available to me. So knowing that, where you might need to start might be a very different place, that once you have developed the capacities to meet, the pain, the fear, the shame that trauma can bring with it, there's so much more available. So in terms of a practice, what I would invite you is first to start to notice where are those places where you might feel not grounded and spacious, and to bring compassion to that. To notice if you shame yourself, and don't shame yourself if you shame yourself, but bring compassion to that and include that too. Those would be a couple of practices that I would like to invite everyone to. And we would like to open the space for questions. Questions and wisdom. Thank you so much. Yes, I love that. Thank you for including. Yeah, because it's the collective intelligence. Sorry.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for this. I love it. I have two questions. One is very direct. What do you think, I don't know who wants to answer, about ancestral medicine like ayahuasca or mushrooms to inner work, to healing traumas? Because I know that sometimes by the mind it's so difficult to get in this place, but with some medicines can be easier. I'd love to know more about it. And the other one is, you talked about the system. We were talking about this yesterday in the dinner. And what I feel in my experience is, when I was 17, my dad said, I told to my dad, I want to work with you. And then he said, oh, you can't. Just men will work with us in our company. But I'll give some money until you need. Oh my goodness. So we have a capitalism, patriarchal system, and I had this trauma with me, and I put my feminine energy somewhere, and I was like a man, showing them that I can do it, And I think 5 years after I got in the company, spent 20 years there, when I decided to when I changed myself and decided to change the word, he said, no, you have to be here. No, I'm going to do another thing. But what I felt is a lot of women in this system do the same, forget the feminine energy, because for be a leader in this world has to and we get sick. And we are like repeating the system. Because it's a woman, but when we get there, we forget the feminine energy and we do it again, and we cannot change. Yeah. So how can we remember in men, in women, because we need both, our feminine energy to equilibrate with masculine energy and go there, do it like masculine energy, but in collaboration, intuition, together with more lovely like a feminine energy.
Yeah,
that's my question.
Do you want to take a few questions and then rather than?
Sure,
yeah?
Sounds like a good idea. So, over there.
Gary's an old pro at this, so.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Actually, building on this, my first question was, I didn't quite move on from, Louise, your invocation of the grandmothers, because I immediately have been thinking this whole time about the gender differences of what you're both talking about. It would be useful maybe to have some of the panelists reflect on when are we invoking shared humanity and the tasks at hand for us as people? When is this gendered labor? There seems to be a kind of smuggling in of like what to me sound like gendered forms of care labor, awareness of the others, right? Awareness of the of forms of interconnection, and yeah, just some reflections on the perhaps gendered nature of what you're talking about.
I'll be brief. Is it still on? Okay. I'll be brief. I think it connects to that. I had a light bulb when you were talking about backlash, and you were talking about accessibility around inner work and what language we use. And I feel like from a US context, it feels like we're in this profound moment of backlash where a lot of white folks and a lot of men felt like they were being pushed to do work that they were not ready to do. And now it's swinging back to this like, screw you all, like we're not gonna be uncomfortable, we're reclaiming our comfortable, traumatized, but comfortable place that we were in. So just wondering if anyone could speak to that.
Thank you very much for the amazing conversation. I represent an organization whose mission is to develop students holistically so they can shape a better future for themselves and for all of us. And I personally came late to this journey thanks to an amazing person. And I would like to know, like, how early do we need to start? Like, how do we bring this to children, to students, to the schools, the classrooms, so that we are all, you know, embracing this from the early generations?
Yeah, hi, Gary Cohen, Healthcare Without Harm. You talked about trauma in individuals and trauma in systems, and in between are organizations that we are all part of. And so one of the important things that we need to kind of work on is at multiple levels. And so in this moment where the US regime and others are manufacturing trauma, triggering trauma, intergenerational trauma, racial, gender, et cetera, having our organizations hold the resonance, create safe space, is going to be really crucial, because people are coming in with all of this trauma individually. And one of the things that short-circuit our ability to be effective organizations is our ability not to really know how to hold that in a collective. And so the great work of global optimism, the great work of the Wellbeing Project has been focused more on individuals and helping them develop practices and mindfulness and a whole set of things to support that wellness. And I think the next kind of iteration of our collective work is to build that into the organizations, because we need that. We're going to need that so much over the next period, so that our organizations are safe places for people to come.
Thank you. We'll take one more question and then we'll turn to the answers because we don't have a ton of time.
Thank you all so much. I'm Abby Fallick. I lead the flight school where we are trying to restore the innate inner characteristics of intuition and compassion and courage in the rising generation so that they move through their lives from the outset in a more deliberate way, in a way that's so much more aligned with everything we're both hearing but sensing in this conversation. And I was just struck, Gary, when you said the wisdom in this room, there's this sense of where wisdom resonates with wisdom. You were talking about resonance and creating, working with our own selves and nervous systems to be calming reservoirs for others, but building organizations where that's infused. And working with young people on the cusp of adulthood, I'm just so aware of how hungry they are for exactly this, for being in the presence of humans who are coherent, grounded, wise, and being a part of organizations that are as well. And I don't know if this is a question, but there's this sense of like we are hurtling toward these breaking points, and everything we're talking about feels like the only medicine that's needed. And I feel this conflict between, of course we can't move faster than the speed of trust, and yet it is so urgent that this becomes accessible, not elite or exclusive, but it has to be the ground note. And so it's sort of balancing this wholesome ambition that I have around, how we get to this shift globally. Anyway, that was very, very roundabout, but I'm so grateful for this space, and optimistic that it's possible, because the breaking points are so excruciating, and the technology is exacerbating all of this, like the escape from ourselves when what's needed is the grounding into it. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
So, would anybody like to start with the answers?
I can start.
Yeah, Louise.
Oh no, I've got my.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's fantastic to hear all of that. So I'll just make a few responses. Was it John that you said? Gary. I really want to talk. I really want to put my energy behind what you're saying, because I think organisations have such a role in this time. So I so agree with that. And you know, to me, we do want to be grounded and settled, but actually, mostly we want to reconfigure and transform the trauma that arises. Do you know what I mean? We don't want to avoid it or bypass it, or let's just all be happy. And there's a lot arising, and to me, organisations, if they can bring people together, I kind of call it deep performing teams, or, you know, like we've created a program called Homanu, just to help organisations be the transforming agent of all the trauma that's arising. I think that's super important, that we do want to be, you know, we do want to resource to be settled, but we actually want to be able to work actively with those triggers and trauma arisings to transform them, or we'll miss the opportunity. Now, all of you sit on trauma fields. You will. Your work sits on a trauma field, and those trauma fields are energy that want to come through human nervous systems in order to transform. And so I think that's just such an important thing. And if we can really build organisations to become part of the transforming process, because they're often the ones in these trauma fields, I think we'll get a lot of change. So I really wanted to just say that. The masculine, feminine, I find could talk about it forever. Because of course I'm both, hey, and you're both, and of course we've had an imbalance. And, you know, also working with the masculine wounding, I think, is enormous. And, you know, as we build this connective tissue, it's super important that men find their feminine, in a way, for this place, to be able to do it. And that's what I see happening as well. So there's heaps to talk about the collective trauma around patriarchy, and it's an active field. It's an active trauma field that, again, organisations can train to be able to work with in an active way, just like we can work with colonisation, slavery. We actually can work with these big energies now. We have the ability and the know-how to do it, to use our collective nervous systems to transform these big energies. You cannot go away and heal from patriarchy. You cannot go away and heal from colonisation. I can't do that on my own. But if we form collective bodies, a collective resonance body, we can do magic. And I've really seen it happen. So I just want to give so much hope for that work, and I really think organisations, and as I say, you're all on trauma fields if you're in the NGO sector. If we learn to work with them in a healthy way, I think we transform a lot. So yeah, that's probably...
If I can add to that, because I think trauma is certainly not only philanthropy or non-profit space. I think what you said that about sort of manufacturing trauma, it's kind of, you know, it gets into your body when you think about it like that. So me and the organization I represent, and sort of, you know, how can we, and other, you know, the sort of the receiver and the funders and the builders, and how do we have that kind of mindset and just sort of taking that in and thinking, so what do we do then? What needs to be done? So I'm thinking about the way we fund stuff, the way we go in directly into a meeting and start talking about execution stuff. Or like, which is almost like impossible if you think about it, that we are in this, sitting on this manufactured trauma kind of share, right? It's by definition impossible. So I think, I mean, and I'm also, it's important in the for-profit sector as well, in the industry, like really taking this into deeply doing that. Because I think the next thing is actually, what do we need to do differently, knowing and getting that sort of into our body. And I think that, which I like, can we fund differently? I think we're doing it a little bit, certainly not enough, because you need to start practicing and sort of building those and enable those spaces to happen intentionally. And that needs funding. It needs like another way of thinking of stuff, because there's no other ways actually.
Thanks, Annika. So we had very little time left, but we would love to.
I was going to quickly add, and Gary, thank you for that. Shout out to the Wellbeing Project. I sit on the advisory board, as you know, and we are having exactly this conversation on how do we start thinking from a systems perspective, right? The organization was started as providing a base for change makers not to have to go through burnout, right? Most people who are change makers it was a hero complex. It was the white knight complex, right? I will burn the midnight oil and I will do everything that needs to be done, and then 2-3 years later I'm burnt out and everything falls apart. How do you create a container for those people and hold them through so that their work can be sustained? Now the conversation is, if you look at the work we've done with the Hearth Summit and the regional summits, we've brought together, I think it's about 20,000 people in the various summits across the world, ability to touch, I think, 3 million people so far. Now we're saying, okay, now we have to start thinking about systems, not individual, but systems, right? You can't lose the individual, but the systems piece is important. And so I'll say to anybody who doesn't know about the Wellbeing Project and the Hearth Summit that's in Slovenia in June, please come, please register, please come, because this conversation, we are only beginning this conversation. And the way I think about where we are is, I think of the world as pendulums, right? Or like movements as pendulums. Is we used to be in a place of globalization and everybody will get collective good. We reached the zenith of that. Now it's coming back, and actually it's individualization and every country by itself, and that is swinging back. Our responsibility is to make sure that that pendulum swings back, gets high and then comes back faster. But when it comes back, it needs to find us on a different level, right? It can't find us where we were. We must be at a different plane, because that's the only way we get better, right? And so where are we holding space to make sure that we can get better, so that when it swings back, we're a level above. Sorry, I know we have a minute to go.
And John, last, over to you.
Response to the questions or anything?
Final words.
Final words. Yeah, so I guess my encouragement, my world in the last 15 years is systems change. And in systems change, a conversation about trauma and healing is pretty rare. And there's no way, absolutely no way we are going to transform our systems unless we put that conversation at the center. And there's no way that conversation is going to happen without inner work, right? This is, in my opinion, my humble opinion, this is the path to actually, addressing the existential crises that we have. And it's not a conversation right now that is central to the mainstream. And then we get into conversations about, this looks really fairly interesting, how can we scale it? I think we're trying to put what's a different paradigm and way of moving as a planet into the existing paradigm that is not working for us. It is absolutely not working for us. It's falling apart. So we can't keep saying, this seems interesting, but let's try to do it the way that we've always done things. So.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And Louise, could you close us off with this lovely quote that you shared with us?
I love this quote by Arundhati Roy, and I don't know if people know, Indian activist, but she says, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And I can hear her breathing too.
So with that, let's take a deeper breath. And allow all that has been shared here today to live in your hearts and your bodies, and may you walk away with something valuable. And may we all together continue in this conversation. Thanks, everyone, for having been here today.